Welcome back, everyone. So, we're continuing on the antinatalist nihilist perspective. I'm arguing for a neutral natalist nihilist perspective that this has to do with subjectivity and bodily autonomy. Those are my main arguments, if you didn't know. I have made some other arguments, and I got some good, decent responses back. So I wanted to take a look at those. Give me just a minute. So first, I wanted to show this argument from another anti-theist, atheist, nihilist, whatever label you want to give us. You know, because this is a debate going on within the so-called family. And so this person said, the basic issue I take with antinatalism is its comparison of existence with non-existence. In the former, there is an observer to witness pleasure and pain. In the latter, there is nobody, and so it is meaningless even to talk about the concepts of pain and pleasure. There is absolutely nothing in non-existence, so the best we can do is to remain silent on it from a vantage point of existence. Comparing existence to non-existence and the context in question is comparing apples to oranges. I've heard this argument made on Mendham's channel, and he does not like this argument. He hates it. But to me, I kind of agree with this in the sense that we don't really have a metric that we can use to measure the varying levels of pain, because pain is a spectrum, nor do we have a metric to measure the levels of pleasure, because pleasure is a spectrum. And I don't know that we certainly don't have a metric to compare the varying levels of pain to the varying levels of pleasure to each other. There's just no metric available, considering that pain is subjectively defined and pleasure is subjectively defined. People experience these things differently. Now, there are some things, yes, we could say are inherently, like we agree upon, like 99.9% of the world will find these things to be painful or pleasurable, but for the most part, this is predominantly subjective. It is something they actually even teach in medical school. As they brought this up, is that pain is always subjective. If somebody says they're in pain, you must believe them, because you don't know. You're not them. They absolutely, they are experiencing pain, and it may be extreme to them, whereas the way that you perceive it, it's not extreme, but to them it is. They may not have any other reference to compare their pain level to, and this might be the worst possible pain they've felt. So it is subjective. It's an opinion. And the same goes for pleasure, I suppose. Also, an antinatalist is able to make this argument because existence allows him to. And making this argument, it is ironical that she turns against the very thing that made it possible in the first place for her to make this argument. In general, life is what makes such arguments and talking about the purpose of life possible. It is then suspicious to apply the attributes of meaning, purpose, pleasure, pain, etc. to life itself. Life stands above these human ideas, which should apply only to entities within life. Life exists because of its longing for itself. The consent argument is meaningless because there is nobody to take consent for birth before the person is born. For the same reason, Kant's practical imperative: a man should never be used as a means to an end, but always be an end in himself, as a defense for antinatalism, can be refuted because the person does not exist before birth. This is just the nature of reality, the way things are structured. If there is no question of depriving an infant of pleasure because the infant does not exist, then there is also no question of saving the infant from pain because the infant does not exist. Basically, in a situation of non-existence, there is no infant. All evaluations of pain and pleasure have been done conditional upon the pre-existence of life and of identity. Also, perceptions of pain and pleasure are subjective. I brought this up. And so it is questionable to base an argument on the premise that pain is bad to the extent that this argument can be made. Given the peculiarity of this situation, one way out is to take the existence of life as axiomatic and work to manage and mitigate risk in it to the extent possible rather than to eliminate life itself. The source of the risk, of course, on a micro scale, it can be decided on a case-by-case basis whether it would make sense to bring another person into the world. But I feel uncomfortable with antinatalism as a philosophical argument as based upon its premises owing to the above reasons. So I found this person's argument to be basically a pretty popular anti-theist nihilist perspective that is an argument against the syllogism made by antinatalists. And that's what I find so interesting, is that this is an actual philosophical debate within the same category of itself. And I also looked, I didn't read Benatar, I didn't read it, but I skimmed over some things about Benatar and the things that he wrote, which is where some of this anti-natalist sort of perspective came from. And I wasn't trying to make an argument that I was trying to stay away from the argument that, of course, from the eyes of the cosmos, we don't matter, because the cosmos is not it's not a consciously, it doesn't possess awareness. It's just random events that happen. So it's not cognizant. It's not intelligent. It doesn't plot and meticulate and say, well, you know, if I do this and I do this, then this will happen. It doesn't do that. It's just a series of random events that have a cause and effect relationship, and that's it. There's no rhyme or reason to it. So one of the things that I was thinking about in that aspect is like the macro level and the micro level, is that, well, it doesn't really matter that life doesn't matter to the cosmos. It doesn't really matter that life doesn't matter to nature or to the earth. It doesn't matter because it matters to us, to human beings, to the observer, to life. Life matters to life. And this could be traced all the way back down to single-celled organisms. And anything that did not have this perpetual instinct to not only survive but procreate, proliferate, then it died out a long time ago. It won the Darwinian Award, so I guess antinatalism won for that particular strand of biological manifestation. But I mean, you can even see it in the animal kingdom. It's not so much that we make a conscious decision to keep perpetuating the species or perpetuate survival as much as it is a mechanism that has come about through evolution. Like my cat, for example, does not sit around and think. She doesn't sit around thinking about why is life here? What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of existing? If she doesn't think about what death is, she doesn't sit around thinking about what lies after death. All she knows from a instinctual perspective is that she just doesn't want to die. She doesn't ask those questions. This is a human burden. This is something that human beings do. And if I suppose you could say that ignorance is bliss, because if we did not have the ability to ask these questions, then we wouldn't even be sitting around pondering the idea of antinatalism at all. Or even like what is the purpose of all this? What is the meaning? And to that, I have a story. It's sort of about my embark into being an atheist or anti-theist or nihilist. And is that when I was 7 years old, I used to drive my dad crazy because I would analyze everything until it drove me mad, until like I just would wind up in this realm of circular reasoning and couldn't make sense of anything, and it would just be like dichotomize, like why this, why that, why this, why that. But I asked my dad, I would say, what is the point of life? What is the point of existence if all we're going to do is die? And supposedly we go on and we go and we live for eternity. If we go on and live for an eternity, then what is the point of this life? And he said, well, supposedly this is supposed to be a test to see if you can make it into heaven or whatever. And I said, well, what's the point of the test if the God is omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing, and I mean, before you're even born, since he's omniscient, he knows where you are, so what's the point of the test? Why not just be born directly into eternal life? And my dad, in his frustration, probably didn't realize what he was doing by answering the question like this, but, well, I don't know. He was secretly atheistic, but I was raised agnostic. He didn't come forward about his atheism until later on in life. But he said, well, look, not everything... He asked a question. He said, why does everything have to have a reason? Why does everything have to make sense? Why can't some things or something just simply be because that's the way it is? And I said, aha, you're absolutely right. There doesn't need to be any logical or reasonable explanation for life. There doesn't have to be. There doesn't need to be. Why does there have to be? And thus began my journey into atheism at age 7. I did dabble in deism for a while and hung out with the pagans, which I found their religious philosophy to be quite interesting and very different than Christians. It wasn't a matter of do as I say or face the punishment. It was more like you can do whatever you want, but just know that however you conduct yourself, it was based more on like a realistic premise or perspective, is that if like you go around and you act like a dick, you have nothing more than to expect that the universe and all its observers will treat you that way. So, and it also acknowledges that no one is pure evil and no one is purely good, is that we're like a mixture of these things, or that we're on a scale of that. And what side you choose to lean on, like in the things that you do, like basically if you try to be good in your life, then that is what will define you. But if you try to do bad things in your life, then that is what will come to define you. So I found the pagan perspective to be interesting, but ultimately I was just nothing more than pagan Gnostic, and eventually I had to come to reconciliation with myself that I didn't believe in these things, and that I thought it was silly to do their version of prayer, which is spell casting. And although I found some of the traditions to be very interesting and enlightening and fun, I didn't believe it. I had to come forward and say, I'm sorry, this is great stuff, but I just don't believe in it. I'm an atheist, and I saw the poison that religion bestowed, well, all the bigotry and bullshit and ostracization that religion creates. And, like, no, I hate religion. Like, religion is poison. But that was my descent into atheism, or anti-theism, essentially nihilism. I would say most anti-theists are probably nihilists. They're moralist nihilists. And I guess that's a given, but whatever. So, if we go back all the way down to single-celled organisms, one of the arguments that I made, I'm going to illustrate this, that this is something that is just intrinsically natural, is that let's say the antinatalist argument works, and we leave no life available. As long as the environment is capable of sustaining life, if you leave just one small colony or cluster of single-celled biological life forms, they don't possess consciousness or cognizance, awareness, but they will do what they do, and you will end up with more complex biological life forms, such as animals. Again, this is not something that is planned. It is just an outcome of random events. I don't know that you can control that. I don't think the introduction of what we call life, which is basically like a biological organism that happens to be self-aware, I don't know that was deliberate. I don't think that you can make that claim, that it was deliberate. It was a causality of random events, that nobody's in control of this. Nobody controlled this. Nobody sat down, no living entity, no spiritual entity sat down and said, I'm going to clump these cells together and create more complex biological life forms. So basically what I'm saying is we are nothing more than a biological growth. It's just this awareness that we have, this awareness to say, I think, therefore I am, that gives us the ability to make this strange proclamation that because there is pain, and there is more pain than life, ergo life should not exist. The only reason we're able to even make that claim in the first place is because we are self-aware. If that wasn't the case, if I suppose life could have evolved not to, like, if there were no predators, let's say, and the single-celled organisms could evolve into more complicated biological life that, still not as complex as something like an animal or a fish, but, we're talking about, like, multicellular organisms that are still very small, that some were predatorial and some, of course, were not. And so we developed this, there's this mechanism that some drifted away and had this instinct to say, it's an evolutionary process. You have to think about that. It's an evolutionary process. I'm sure some of them didn't develop that instinct, like defensive mechanisms. Ultimately, the fear of death is just nothing more than a defense mechanism. It's, all these cells that make up our body. It's this defense mechanism that's in our brain as a development over time. So that's what the fear of death is. It's a defense mechanism. And I'm not ashamed or afraid to say I am afraid of death, because I realize it is nothing more than a defense mechanism. And we see that defense mechanism malfunction in things like anxiety and panic disorders, like people with agoraphobia. What purpose does that serve? There's nothing. It's not a defense mechanism at that point. It's like, what is what endangerment to the host is agoraphobia preventing to the host? It does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. It's a pointless, and almost an absolutely truly pointless fear response. And that's the mechanism that controls that fear that's just malfunctioned. So, yeah. But I would absolutely say that fear is a self-defense mechanism. I'm going to silence this because this is going to be annoying if it just keeps going off. Okay. So let's say that these, multicellular organisms didn't have to face predatorial behavior. It's possible maybe life could have evolved not to have any kind of self-defense mechanism, such as the fear of death and pain. It's just like the central nervous system interpreting pain is once again a self-defense mechanism that's a result of billions of years of evolution of these unaware, uncognizant cells or multicellular organisms trying not to perish. And it's as simple as that. And then there's, nihilists like me that I more embrace pain and death. Like, I like to think about it. I like to think about death until it scares me, because I want it to become so real in my mind, because I don't think most people face death this way. Like, a friend of mine, his mother just recently passed away, and he says he's an atheist, but I don't think he's really thought in depth about what death is. And then when his mother passes away, enters in this, like, I hope they're in a better place. Well, I don't think they are. I think they're just dead. But I could have said at that moment, one day, that same thing you just witnessed is going to happen to you and everyone you know and all life forms. That is not unique and indicative solely to your mother. But I didn't find that appropriate in a time of grieving because he's in pain. And to me, like, I don't like to ignore pain or pretend it's not there or push it down. I like to feel it. That might seem weird, but I do. I like to feel it, and I think it's appropriate, and I think it's a natural response to that type of thing. So I don't understand the point and purpose, or to what point and purpose there is of trying to ignore that. I don't understand that. I think I think by ignoring those emotions, you're doing harm to yourself mentally. I think it damages other functions that the brain has. I think it's a natural response, and you should probably just go ahead and experience that pain. and get it over with. It's really not all that bad, and it makes you think. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's irrelevant that we are nothing in the eyes of the cosmos or the universe. It's irrelevant, because to life itself, life is important, and that's the only case that matters. Is to us, life is sacred and precious. To my cat, her life is precious and sacred, and she would like to preserve it. And to any animal species, this is what they do. You're talking about a psychological evolution here. It's not something that was constructed. It's just an instinctual response. So that's my stance on that. And we had somebody that made some interesting... So we had these. I'll read these to you, because Final Fantasy, you made some really good arguments. And I think you said that one of the arguments I made was vague, or that you couldn't understand it. It was in this one. You said the position number 4. He said... No, it wasn't this one. It was position number 3. Now, this position, he's every position I have, of course, is dumb. It's actually so convoluted that I'm not entirely sure what you're trying to imply. I think you're saying that since humans are just chaotic crap, like the universe, that is exactly what I'm saying. It has no right to judge anything or make any conclusions about anything. It doesn't have any cognizance or awareness to make judgments. I could be wrong in deducing that as your position. No, you're not wrong. That's exactly the position. But it's the best I can make of it. So assuming that's your point, you don't have to assume anymore. I'm telling you that is the point. His following is his rebuttal. He says he is a determinist concerning life forms, human will, and the functions of the universe. I don't believe the universe is complete chaos. Well, really, though, if you look at it, it is complete chaos. You could argue that it has a chaotic balance. And I think that's what you get at later. I believe there's an abstract deterministic function to it. I don't know that there's a deterministic. That would imply that it has some sort of cognizance, I suppose. Everything is cause and effect. That I do agree with. Not a jumbled mess of random crap going on. Well, yeah, it is. It's both. It's a jumbled mess of random crap that results in cause and effect relationship. I'm not saying the universe is intelligent. I'm saying it's abstract order. I don't know that it's abstract order at all. I don't know that there's any order to it. It just seems like a mess. I mean, like, if you were to look at the waves of light and sound bouncing around the room that your sensory organs cannot pick up, that we've actually developed machinery that can, and you think, Neil Freeman, a physicist, pointed this out, is that, there's all these waves of light and stuff bouncing all over the room, going from one place to another, and you think to yourself, like, is it all really there? And yes, it's really, really there. You just don't see it. You can't hear it. You can't smell it. You don't know it's there, but it's there. So I would say that, yeah, it's pretty chaotic. It's a mess of shit. I don't know that there's any order to it. It's just like this thing hit that thing and wielded it towards the sun. I mean, oops, like I don't know that there's any order to it whatsoever. It's random events occurring continuously. Even if pure chaos created the human brain has cognitive function, which can comprehend the universe around it. It's not equal in function to the universe. A hill of rocks isn't comparable to human cognition. This is true. They are not doing the same things. Human cognition is able to understand value, a concept of fairness, efficiency, etc. The universe is not unconstructive junk. I suppose. I agree with the cognition. Of course, human beings have cognition, and human beings, because we have cognition, created value and fairness and efficiency, etc. Consciousness experience has intrinsic value because pain and suffering have a... I don't know what he means by that, which signifies a negative. A sentient being can... I love how you absolutely left out the positive, which is the opposite of pain and suffering, which is pleasure. You completely left that out. So it also implies a positive. A sentient being can feel the difference between sleeping unconscious state, which is neutral, and feeling pain, suffering, negative state. Well, what about complacency, which is neither negative or positive? What about complacency? We are capable of feeling that. Where would you place that on the diagram? That's not sleeping. It's still a state of consciousness, but it is neither pain nor pleasure. Again, though, I think this is a pretty decent argument, though. This is a good argument against my position. He goes on to position number 4. The best way to fix something... And notice, even if I disagree with you, I'm not calling you stupid and deleting your comment, which is what Mr. Inminham does, is that if he disagrees with you, then it's just like, oh, that's stupid, delete. Oh, that's stupid, delete. I don't think that's productive to an actual philosophical debate or argument. Like, I think that we can do this in a civilized manner. Like, there's no use in saying, like, this is dumb, this is stupid. It's like, we're just in a disagreement, but believe it or not, there's probably many things being on a nihilist scale that we would, in fact, agree with. It's just, should we promote the idea of antinatalism? Should we promote the idea of neutral natalism, which would be individual choice and bodily autonomy, which goes into social philosophy? Or should we promote the idea of pronatalism, which is something that the theists would rejoice over and go, yay! Whereas I'm saying it's an individual choice. So anyway, no, I'm not going to go, oh, that's stupid, and delete your comment. I think that you should be heard, whether I agree with you or not. There are people that do agree with you. He said, so debunking position number 4. The best way to fix something is to prevent any possibility from any bad or brokenness from happening in the first place, permanently. So not having kids will prevent all the horrific possibilities of the horror torment in the future. They don't need to exist anyway. It's a lot easier than juggling around social reforms to see which one works. And even if some sort of utopia is achieved, I don't think any utopia will be achieved. I really don't. I conflict is a part of life. When I say anti-Darwinianism, I don't mean a utopian society. What that means, in saying anti-Darwinian, is making it possible for those in nature that would not survive have a higher probability of survivability, and having a more, a less pain or a more pain-free lifestyle. It's about trying to really, I'd stay away from this utopia. Utopias are bullshit. They never fucking work. They just don't. There's no way you're going to create a reality without conflict. It's just not going to happen. It won't happen. But with the advent of things like CRISPR, and this is arguments that other anti-theists have made against the antinatalist position as well, is that, we're getting to the point where we can cure, like, spinal neuropathy. We're getting to the point where we can manipulate someone's genetic sequence to give them a stronger immune system that could possibly even defeat something like HIV. These medical advancements are what I would call a push in the direction towards anti-Darwinianism. Not utopia, not a utopian society, not a utopian system of government. I'm not arguing that. Anti-Darwinianism is not a political position. It's advancements in medical technology or advancements in technology in general that make our lives easier. Not free from not free from conflict at all. So, not a utopia. That utopias do not exist, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so some sort of utopia is achieved. What is actually accomplished? Perfect gluttony. That's the end goal. Well, so what? Who cares? Again, it's from the eyes of the cosmos, it doesn't care. And yes, eventually the human species will end, so it doesn't matter. But to us, in the moment, to us as a biological life form, it matters to us. And maybe that's the only thing that matters, is that we care. That's it. It doesn't have to be any deeper than that. It's like there doesn't have to be. Again, I'm going to reiterate this from when I opened up the video, from opening, is there doesn't have to be a rational or logical reason for life. There doesn't have to be. So what that it's going to end? So what that it doesn't matter? It matters to us. Who cares that it doesn't matter? Why does the perspective of the cosmos matter? Why does that have anything to do with anything? Like, yes, it serves a function when you want to sort of try to be the outsider looking in and think about, well, if we were to personify the cosmos and nature itself, what does the human species look like? Ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, we tantamount to nothing. So it's useful for that, for analyzing the world around us, if you will. But other than that, it carries very little merit. It doesn't matter. The cosmos is not consciousness or cognitively aware itself, so who cares that it doesn't matter to the cosmos? We care. We're the ones that have put value to life because we're self-aware. And I'm saying maybe that's the only thing you need to argue this, is to say, well, so what? People want to live. People want to procreate. People want the species to go on as long as we can make it go on. What does it matter that the end game is a nothing? What does that matter? What does it matter that there's pain in life? What does it matter that there's complacency? What does it matter that there's pleasure, when the only thing that really truly matters is that we as human beings, as a life form, and other life forms as well, have assessed a particular value to life itself. We do that. And maybe that's all you need. You're advocating for making more advanced life preservers, but I'm asking, why even bother swimming in a dangerous ocean in the first place? Because we want to. That's why. Why does it have to be any more complicated than that? Why does there have to be a reason behind doing that? Why can't it be just because that's the way things are? We are compelled by nature. Why is that not a good enough answer or argument for you? It doesn't accomplish anything after you leave the pool, death. Well, of course it doesn't. But so what? You forget to you swam in it. Yeah, you do. And you return to the eternal nothing. Consciousness, cognizance, awareness. End. Done. Yeah. So, I want to be alive now, and I'm prepared to face death. Even though I'm, this brain interprets that as deeply problematic. But I'm fine with that. I don't think I need to rationalize or put a reason behind it. It's because I have assessed, personally, I have assessed value to life, that it is worth the experience, it's worth the ride. You aren't even guaranteed to keep you won't keep your memories. I don't even think there's no guarantee or on guarantee. It's just you won't keep your memories of the swim. So rationally, it's best not to even bother in the first place. And that's a subjective opinion. I mean, that's a subjective position. And that's fine. You could make that argument that for you, subjectively speaking, that it's not worth the swim because you don't even remember being in the pool in the first place. So that's your opinion. For me, I don't care if I don't remember the swim after I'm gone, because this is the trip. It's kind of like the old, well, I don't know, it's an old saying, but it's a saying that without the threat of death, there is no reason to live. It's just kind of like with the presence of an afterlife, it makes this life absolutely, completely pointless and meaningless to just die and then go on and live for eternity. Without death, I would say that there almost is no point to life at all. I asked somebody once, an elderly person, I said, would you want, she was in her 80s, almost 90s, I asked, would you want to live forever? And she said no. And I said, why not? She said, living for eternity sounds exhausting. And so if you don't have the threat of death, then I would say, what is the point of life? After a while, you're going to get really fucking bored. There's only so much you can do, so much you can learn before you've pretty much done it all. I mean, to me, this is starting to sound like dogma, because it's like eternal, like if I can't have eternal life, then fuck it. And it's like, well, if you had eternal life, what would you do with it? I mean, eternity is a long time, and it's almost better that it's not eternal. So that way, it's like, you have to rush and get everything done in this very small allotment of time. It's like you got your whole life to do something, and that's not enough. And that's what makes it interesting. I suppose it's you could also say some people find the thought disturbing. I find the reality thrilling. All right, so debunking position number 2, the blind position. Position 2 is even dumber. I don't know why all this, like, it's dumber, it's dumber, it's dumber. When I first read this, I was thinking, well, you're a big fat poopy head. I mean, you don't have to say everything's dumber. It's dumber, it's dumber, it's dumber. It's an opposition. And then you come up with this. You basically just appeal to rarity. I don't know that that's a fallacy. I suppose you could say that it is a fallacy, as we have appeal to authority, appeal to emotive force, appeal to pity, appeal to masses. And in all the readings, I've never heard anyone say, you've made an appeal to rarity, the rarity of life. Well, a lot of the times, the value of something to human beings assess the value of something based on how finite that thing is. And being that each and every single person is an individual, and their life is finite, would mean that life itself, or each individual person, each individual life, is extremely rare and therefore extremely valuable. This is just how humans assess that something is valuable or not. It's one of the ways. You could say water is valuable, well, because we need to survive, like oxygen. But in other means of assessing value, it's how finite something is. That's just one way. Okay, the rarity, appeal to rarity, the rarity of life, claiming it justifies all the pain, suffering, torture involved with it. Rarity alone isn't enough to give something any sort of philosophical importance or value. That could be true. That could act. I think that might be. I don't know that I can argue that point. I think you have a point. I don't think I can argue that life is rare, and therefore, because it's rare, it is necessary. I could argue because it's rare, it's worth preserving, but I don't know that that would constitute of it having no philosophical importance or value. I argue that pain, suffering, wasted torture has importance, has important value as a philosophical concept. Hold on. So life is rare, therefore it's worth keeping. Pain, suffering is important, therefore the value of life is not of importance. So I'm arguing the rarity of life, therefore it's important. You're arguing the pain of life, therefore it's not important. I don't know. To me, that almost seems like the same argument, only the negative of it. It's actually like a proper argument. I think both might be actually proper arguments, but they're just in contrast to each other. I don't know. Rarity doesn't signify that something is important or ought to be enjoyed or ought to be preserved.
just because something is rare doesn't mean it should last. I think that's a rational statement to make. It is. It's an extraordinarily rational statement to make. I don't know that I can come up with a counter-argument to it. But I would also say that it doesn't make the point either that taking the position of neutral natalism is negated. As the main arguments I've made is not that life is rare. The main argument that I make is that of individual choices and bodily autonomy. Let me provide examples for my point. The element of gold is somewhat rare in the universe, and there are elements even rarer than gold. That does not mean gold or rare elements are intrinsically valuable. Not intrinsically, but human beings define them as being valuable in and of themselves. It doesn't mean gold and rare elements should or need to exist or be preserved just because they are rare. No, you couldn't do that, but you could argue that they are needed because of the use that we get out of them. For instance, making computer boards to be able to make this video. It does not mean they need to be enjoyed either. I don't know. I don't think you even need to make that statement, but it's kind of true. But like it or not, people have used that reason to find enjoyment out of them. If gold and rare elements get destroyed permanently and all that was left in the universe was hydrogen, no bad thing happened, logically or rationally. So rarity isn't enough to prescribe importance or important value. Okay. Another example would be feces of an extinct creature. Just because a piece of shit would happen to be one of a kind doesn't dictate that it has any important value. I think that a paleontologist or an archaeologist, a paleontologist would argue against that. It actually would be very, very important because they would actually analyze it and find out the dietary needs of this said creature. Important at all in and of itself. If somebody destroyed it to appeal to its rarity would be futile, but you could make an argument again to its function. Its important value was projected on by subjective individuals. It had none in itself, nor provide any sort of objective intrinsic goal or function. That's true. For something to be truly important, there has to be some sort of objective or intrinsic value tied to or associated with it, and or it needs to be that itself. That is not entirely true because emotions exist. Whether you like it or not, biological creatures such as us do have, we are driven by emotions. I mean, that's just part of being human, unless you're a sociopath. Importance and oughtness starts with objective intrinsic value, which is an abstract concept, but not the focus here. Lastly, this. Sunrises, flowers, nuclear, whatever, birds, etc. do not need to be observed. No, they don't need to be observed. But subjectively on my part, they are desired to be observed. It wouldn't be bad if nothing were ever observed at all. That is a subjective stance. You cannot you can't objectively say that I mean, it's not bad, it's not good, it's neither. It's neutral. The enjoyment you get out of it is fine. I'm glad at least we agree on that. But you need to realize it's just an addiction fabricated in your brain. And I don't have a problem with that. And you can't even see the real essence of it because nobody's brain can see reality as it is, only a lesser version of it through a flawed brain. And see, that's interesting because that is a philosophical, that delves into a philosophical assumption as that when we are, as the observers of the world around us, we have to ask the question, how accurate our assessment of the world around us is our senses. And it is an assumption that it's accurate enough to make these proclamations of fact, or you have to make the assumption that it is not. Either way, it's an assumption because we have no other frame of reference to compare it to. None. We have no other alternate reality, no other unbiased perspective, sense of consciousness or awareness that we could ask. So we have nothing else to go on but the assumption that our brains are getting it right, or at least well enough that we can wade through this murky sea of whatever it is that we're in. That's an assumption. Or you're making an assumption that our brains are not good enough. Again, it's an assumption because we have no other frame of reference. None. And we just don't. So you claiming we can actually see those things, even that is a false point. You're making the assumption that you can't see those things. I'm making the assumption that we can't. Either way, it's an assumption. That this is something that was thought of a long time ago by philosophers. It's actually, I think it's part of, 7 philosophical assumptions. And they're really interesting because they really fuck with your head. But it is an assumption, unfortunately. And also, it gets worse. You're going to forget about seeing all that once you die. So that taints the experience right there. To experience something and eventually forget it, you might as well not have even seen it in the first place. Well, I don't know. I don't know that I can make that a proclamation because the only way that you can make that a proclamation is through existence itself. And I really think that's a subjective statement because I don't mind the experience, even if I don't get to remember it. I don't care. To me, it's irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant. It doesn't matter that I don't get to remember it. What matters is that I'm here. So I might as well make the best of it, right? Well, it was very well argued. This was very well argued, and this first one, I don't know if I can make an argument against that. I think that was very well argued. It's not, yeah, well done. Really, well done. And then there's this one, debunking position 1, hypocrisy position. So first of all, antinatalists aren't arguing for committing mass genocide. I don't know that that's a popular argument. I just know that I have seen an antinatalist or heard an antinatalist make that argument. And actually in Menham was against that argument himself. So I'm not saying that all antinatalists are making this argument. I'm just saying one did, at least one. If you actually understood antinatalism, you would realize that it's a position that states that it is better to not come into existence than to come into existence. I understand that. It's a position on birthing children and the logic of creating pain versus creating pleasure. Again, if you understand antinatalism, I wouldn't have had to point that out to you. You don't need to, because I do understand that. Also, answer this. Where did you get the notion that antinatalists are for mass genocide? Cite the source. It was somebody who commented in Minham's channel when he was going over on, not in Minham videos, but in Minham. Somebody left in his comment section this notion, and that's where it came from. I personally am arguing in favor of the Nihilist position for the Nihilism position. And I don't know what Nihilism is, and I will look at your videos at some point and see what the arguments on that are. And he kind of goes into some explanation of that. It is the philosophy that life is fundamentally broken, illogical, pointless, destructive, wasteful from its core function all the way up to its best case scenario. Unlike antinatalism, which is mainly focused on the ethics of reproduction, Nihilism is focused on the nature of value in a secular world with no intelligence running it. It is concerned with pondering on what life actually is and what it ultimately amounts to, and if it's worth it. Logically, it's not. You could make that argument that logically it's not. You could. Again, the macro, as the commentator that I read at the beginning said, yes, from a macro perspective. Logically, it isn't. But from the observer's position, it is. So, I don't know what you do about that conundrum. I will check out the Nihilism playlist on your channel to learn more. There's nothing necessarily wrong with causing certain lesser amounts of pain, suffering to prevent a greater amount of pain, suffering, wasted torture. I'm glad we agree on that. Example of this being true would be like suffering a needle sting for a vaccine against a terrible disease, beating up several muggers in self-defense, getting chemotherapy for cancer, etc. Under Nihilism, am I pronouncing this right? Nihilism. The goal is to reduce life population to a certain small, tiny amount through non-production, and then enact some sort of earth-destroying device which will destroy the planet, ending the pointless cycle of torment on Earth. I think that's a very extreme position to take. And to me, that's cultish-like behavior. I don't think that you'll ever get that. Because, unfortunately for you, I think the majority of the human population, be they theist or anti-theist, is irrelevant. Most people, being the observers, most life forms, have the will to survive and exist and perpetuate that. Most people don't look at life as nothing but suffering. We acknowledge that it's got an abundant amount of pain, but to me, the abundant amount of pain I cannot justify lifelessness because pain. So, interesting arguments. Very well argued, and I appreciate that. I really do. I appreciate it. Even dumber, even dumber, even dumber. So, thank you for the positions. Thank you for watching, tuning in, participating in the discourse. It's been fun. And if you are on a nihilist scale or anti-theist scale, there's probably a lot of positions you would agree with me on. And I will say one thing, like, I've looked into alt-right philosophies, and this philosophy right here is something that the alt-right, very Christo-fascist agenda thinks is already happening, but in my, I don't know that it's opinion. I think it's just conspiracy theories. There's some very vivid descriptions of how they think this is happening and how they think that this is going on. Is that the destruction of a particular group of people. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were greatly against this. Like, more than usual. Like, they're against me, but I think that they would be like, no to this. Like, absolutely the fuck not. And maybe that's irrelevant to you, but I find this to be this last one, the goal is to reduce the population to a tiny amount through non-reproduction and in the globe. I can say now that that's very doubtful, and some have even said that the proclamations of these sort of stances is dogmatic in principle, and it's almost like trying to obtain sort of utopia. I see more dogmatic principles in it, like well, no, it is utopian. It's like let's try to create a space of being where there is no pain. So you're the only solution you can come up with for that is no life at all. That's utopia. There you go. No observer. Just knock that out. Yeah, I don't know. So, I don't know if you've seen Final Fantasy. I don't know if you've seen Matt Dillahunty's argument against antinatalism or this kind of position, but I think you should see that because I think that he makes a really strong argument. And believe it or not, I found it interesting when I delved into this a little deeper. I found out that the arguments I'm making are not unique and that other anti-theists and nihilists have made similar arguments against antinatalism. And, there's no harm in just having a civil philosophical debate over this. That's my understanding of what philosophy is, isn't it? It's the art of debate. There's no reason to, it's dumber. And, I'm not going to act like a Minham and go, this is stupid. I'm gonna delete it. No. I'm glad you were created so that we could have this little debate and this conversation, even if after I'm dead, I don't remember. And I hope that people in the future get to watch us have this debate, even if they, after they're gone and dead, don't remember. You know, we're like, think of it this way, I guess. Life is only a means of finding something to do until you die. And I'm fine with that. We're just buying time until the day we die. And I would like to do that with more constructive things, like having these philosophical arguments and questioning what life is and the meaning of life itself. It's good, and I think it perpetuates the mind further. I would like to see a day where, you know, it's not wasted energy on some of the the more pointless things that we do that are not needed, that we think we need. I know that sounds probably hypocritical to you, but I'm being a social critic at this point. There's things societally and socially driven where it's like, man, this really doesn't need to be here, and it's antithetical to human nature. And that's where I partake in social criticism, is that, you know, in this small time frame that we have to exist, it seems like we are wasting our time doing these things when we could be using our time to do things that are more productive, or at least more stimulating to this observer in the time frame that we have. So, let me know what you think in the comments section below. Maybe I'll make a video that even you antinatalist nihilists will agree with, because I'm still a nihilist at the end of the day. Everything is nothing and nothing is everything. I just, I think that reproduction is an individual choice. It has to do with bodily autonomy, and I don't think it's something that you can dictate onto the rest of the world, or something that you should. And if you get into the political spectrum of it, I'm very anti-authoritarian. I don't like being told what to do. So if you told me not to, if I wasn't homosexual, if you told me not to procreate and I wanted to, I would just say, fuck you. Like, don't tell me what to do. It's my choice to create life or not. That's within an individual's choice. And I didn't choose to be born, just like you didn't choose to be born. That is a random event, and you are the causality. You and I are the causality of those random events. It's kind of like that speech that Dr. Manhattan gave to, what's her name, in The Watchmen, when he said he was looking for a miracle. He said he was wrong about miracles. And he said, through like all these cells competing in the mating pool, and through billions of years of evolution, all these cells competing, and all the chaos and death and everything that happens, and, you know, this one event happened that was catastrophic in nature, but out of that single event arrives you, and only you, that is just so specific and unique to everything else. It's like watching a molecule of water turn into gold. So I'll leave you to your thoughts. So like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell button on any channel you're subscribed to, and hopefully, you know, I didn't piss you off and chase you away, and you stick around, because you make some really interesting arguments. But yeah, I'm anti-authoritarian. I support the choices and not one's ability to impose one's will on others against their own will, because that is a form of pain and torture, and turmoil, suffering, when one is not able to make their own decisions or choices. So keep gazing into the abyss, but be wary, because the abyss does gaze back into you, doesn't it? With that, I'm out.